Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I was never a big fan of long road trips. Too much time alone, too many quiet nights parked in desolate rest stops, too many unfamiliar roads stretching out into nowhere. But this trip was different. It was supposed to be peaceful, a way to reset. After months of working non-stop, I finally took a break, packed up my RV, and hit the road with no real destination in mind. Just me, my wheels, and the open road. I drove through endless highways, past sleepy little towns, stopping only when I needed fuel or food. Somewhere along the way, I realized I hadn't planned where I'd sleep that night. It was getting dark, and I didn't want to risk driving unfamiliar backroads after sunset. I checked my GPS for the nearest RV parks, but most were either too far or had terrible reviews. That's when I saw it, Sunhaven RV Resort. The name sounded inviting. My GPS listed no reviews, no website, no information at all, just an address marked a few miles off the highway. I figured I'd take a chance. The road leading to Sunhaven was winding, narrow, and flanked by towering pines that swallowed the last bits of daylight. I had that familiar feeling of being somewhere I shouldn't be, but I shook it off. Then, just as I thought I had taken a wrong turn, the trees suddenly opened up, revealing the most beautiful RV park I had ever seen. Neatly paved roads, manicured lawns, vintage-style streetlights casting a golden glow, and rows of RVs parked in perfect order. The main office was a cozy little building with a large wooden sign displaying the name, Sunhaven RV Resort, a place to rest forever. Something about that tagline felt strange, but I chalked it up to bad marketing. A small bell chimed as I stepped inside the office. The air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender. Behind the counter sat a receptionist, a woman in her late 50s, dressed neatly in a cardigan. Her smile was too perfect, her eyes slightly too wide. "Welcome to Sunhaven," she greeted warmly. "You're just in time for the night." Yeah," I replied, glancing at the guest book on the counter. The pages looked aged, yellowed, as if it had been there for decades. The last few names had been scribbled hastily. Some were barely legible. "You're lucky," she continued. "We don't get many visitors anymore." That was odd. The place looked well-maintained, even thriving. Before I could question it, she handed me a handwritten note along with my site number. "Rules for guests. Stay inside after midnight. Do not open the curtains after dark. If you hear voices outside, ignore them." I frowned. Is this a joke? Her smile didn't falter. Just a precaution. A chill crept up my spine, but I forced a chuckle. Maybe it was some weird gimmick, part of the old-fashioned aesthetic. I took the keys and thanked her, heading back to my RV. I parked my RV in Lot 7, nestled between two other campers. The streetlights cast a warm glow, and the place had a peaceful stillness to it. I peered out my window at the other RVs. Their blinds were shut tight, no movement inside. Odd, but maybe people were just keeping to themselves. I settled in, heating up a quick dinner, letting the quiet of the park surround me. It was the first time in a while I felt truly alone, but not in a bad way. Then, around midnight, something changed. A low humming noise filled the air, not from my RV, but from somewhere outside. The streetlights flickered. I glanced at the note the receptionist had given me. "Stay inside after midnight." That's when I heard it. A faint whispering. Not one voice, but several, speaking too softly for me to make out the words. The whispers grew louder, circling my RV. I swallowed hard, my hand hovering over the curtain. I wanted to look, I had to. Then I remembered rule number 2. Do not open the curtains after dark. I forced myself to sit back down, gripping my cup of coffee. This was just my imagination. Maybe the wind was playing tricks on me. After what felt like an eternity, the whispering faded. The humming sound stopped. The streetlights outside glowed steadily again. I exhaled slowly. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe tomorrow, this place would feel normal. I woke up feeling wrong. A headache pounded in my skull. My mouth tasted like metal. The air inside my RV felt stale, like it hadn't been circulated in years. I shook off the drowsiness and stepped outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. That's when I noticed it. The park was different. The once pristine roads now had cracks running through them. The grass wasn't perfectly trimmed anymore. It was slightly overgrown, like no one had maintained it for weeks. I turned to look at the main office. The wooden sign that had looked freshly painted last night was now faded, peeling. I rubbed my eyes. Was I imagining this? I looked around at the other RVs. They were still there, parked in the same places, but now they looked older, dirtier. One had a flat tire that I swore wasn't there before. Something about this place had changed overnight. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The guest book. It was still sitting on the office's front desk, visible through the window. But now it looked ancient, like it had been sitting there for years, untouched. I stepped forward, hesitating at the door. I pressed my hand against the glass. And that's when I saw it. The receptionist was still there, but she wasn't moving. She sat frozen, her hands resting on the counter, her eyes open but glassy, lifeless. My breath caught in my throat. I turned and hurried back to my RV. I needed to leave. Now. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed but didn't start. I twisted the key again. Nothing. My stomach clenched. This didn't make sense. My RV had been in perfect condition. I had driven it here without a single problem. Now, just hours later, it was acting like it had been sitting for years. I pushed open the door and stepped outside, hoping a quick look under the hood would reveal something obvious. As soon as I did, a wall of silence hit me. Not just the quiet of an early morning, but an unnatural silence. No birds, no rustling trees, no wind, just stillness. I glanced at the other RVs, my pulse pounding. The ones that had looked slightly aged this morning now looked far worse. Their exteriors were rusted, windows clouded with grime, tires flat. One of them had its door hanging open, revealing darkness inside. My breathing quickened. I turned to the main office, my stomach tightening. The receptionist. She had been motionless, frozen in place like a mannequin. I had to check if she was still there. I forced my legs to move, stepping toward the building. My shoes scuffed against the pavement, kicking up dust that hadn't been there yesterday. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. The air inside was thick, stale, filled with the scent of rotting wood and mildew. The cozy atmosphere from last night was gone. The furniture was covered in dust, the once glowing lamps coated in cobwebs. And behind the counter, the receptionist was still there. Her face was pale, her eyes open but empty. Her skin looked waxy, her lips dry and cracked. But the worst part, she hadn't moved at all. Her hands were still resting on the counter, her posture exactly the same as when I had seen her last night, like she had been sitting there for years. I took a shaky step back. I had to get out of here. I rushed back to my RV, my thoughts racing. If the engine wouldn't start, I could try walking to the main road. Maybe I could flag someone down. But as I grabbed my phone, my heart dropped. No service. That wasn't possible. I had full bars when I arrived. I didn't have time to think about it. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and headed toward the entrance of the park. I walked fast, my eyes scanning the scenery. The further I went, the worse the place looked. The neatly paved roads were now cracked, filled with weeds. The once trimmed hedges were overgrown, tangled. The vintage streetlights were now bent, shattered, some missing entirely. But I kept moving. When I reached the entrance, I stopped cold. The road that had led me here, the only road in and out, was gone. In its place was a dirt path, barely visible under a layer of dead leaves and debris. I turned in circles, my chest tightening. Where was the road? I had just driven down it last night. I remembered the pavement, the yellow lines, the curve of it as I turned into the park. But now it was as if it had never existed. I swallowed the panic rising in my throat. Fine. If the road was gone, I'd just follow this path. Maybe it would lead me somewhere. I started walking. The further I went, the less real everything felt. The trees loomed taller, their branches tangled like grasping fingers. The dirt beneath my feet was soft, too soft, like it had never been walked on before. And then, I saw something ahead, a shape in the distance, barely visible through the fog that had begun to creep in. I walked faster, relief flooding me. If there was something, anything, out here, maybe I wasn't trapped. But as I got closer, my relief turned to dread. It wasn't a building or another road. It was the entrance sign for Sun Haven RV Resort. I stopped. No, that wasn't right. I had been walking straight. There was no way I had looped back. I turned around. The path behind me stretched on, winding through the trees, but I could swear it hadn't been that curved before. I looked back at the sign. It was different. Last night, it had been new polished. Now it was rotting, the wood splintered. The words were still visible, but they looked like they had been carved decades ago. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding in my ears. There was something new written beneath the resort's name. You can check in, but you can never leave. A shiver crawled down my spine. I backed away, my breath coming in short gasps. I needed to wake up. This had to be a nightmare. I turned and ran back toward my RV. By the time I reached my RV, my lungs were burning. I clutched my knees, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then I noticed something. A shadow in one of the RV windows. One of the other campers. My heart pounded. I wasn't alone. I stumbled toward it, knocking on the door. "Hey, is anyone in there?" The blinds twitched. For a moment, I saw eyes staring back at me. But then, they disappeared. The door unlatched. Slowly, it creaked open. I stepped inside cautiously, the musty air filling my nose. The interior looked untouched, like someone had just been living here. There were half-eaten meals on the counter, a book lying open on the couch. But there was no one inside. I turned, about to leave, and then I saw it. A framed photograph on the table. A family smiling, posing in front of an RV. And in the background was the receptionist. She was standing behind them, her hands resting on their shoulders, smiling like she had known them forever. My stomach turned. I looked around the RV again, a sickening thought forming in my mind. These people had been here, and now they were gone, swallowed by whatever this place was. And if I didn't figure out how to leave, I'd be next. I stood frozen in the doorway of the abandoned RV, my fingers gripping the frame, as if it could somehow keep me tethered to reality. The family in the photo had been here. Here, in this very RV. But they were gone now. I turned my gaze back to the picture, my pulse hammering. The smiling parents, the two kids beaming at the camera, and that woman standing behind them. The receptionist. The one I had seen last night at the check-in counter. The one who hadn't moved an inch. I turned back toward the entrance of the RV park, trying to suppress the panic clawing at my throat. I needed to leave. I stepped outside, my breath catching as my surroundings shifted again. The sun had been up just moments ago. Now the sky was a dull, oppressive gray. Thick fog curled along the ground, swallowing everything beyond a few feet. The air smelled damp, heavy, as if the world had been left to rot. And the RVs, they looked older. More of them had collapsed in on themselves, their roofs caved in, their windows shattered. Like decades had passed overnight. I clenched my jaw, refusing to accept what my eyes were showing me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I forced myself to move, heading straight back to my own RV. Maybe if I just locked myself inside, I could wait this out. But when I reached my vehicle, my stomach twisted into knots. The door was open, and I knew I had locked it. I hesitated before stepping in, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Inside, everything looked almost the same. My blankets were still crumpled from where I had slept. My water bottle still sat on the counter. The faint scent of coffee from yesterday lingered in the air. But then I saw it. The footprints. Dark smudges of dirt tracked across the floor, leading from the door to my bed. My vision swam as fear tightened its grip around my throat. I wasn't alone last night. Something had been inside. I checked the bathroom, the closets, every possible hiding place. But no one was here. Not anymore. My mind raced through the possibilities. Could I have walked in my sleep? Could I have done this without remembering? No. The prints were too large. They weren't mine. I backed up toward the door, gripping the frame for support. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my ribs. That's when I saw it. Something on my table. Something that wasn't mine. A journal. A small, leather-bound notebook resting beside my untouched coffee cup. I swallowed hard and reached for it, my fingers trembling as I flipped it open. The first page sent ice down my spine. If you're reading this, you don't have much time. The handwriting was frantic, as if written in a rush. I turned the page. Sun Haven isn't real. Not anymore. You have to leave before you forget. Before it takes you to. The words blurred as my hands began to shake. I flipped to the next entry, my breath hitching as I read the date. 30 years ago. I dropped the journal as if it had burned me. This can't be happening. A sudden chill crawled up my spine, the kind of cold that didn't belong in this world. I stumbled outside, needing air, needing something real to ground me. But the moment I stepped out, I forgot. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't remember why I had been afraid. I blinked, my thoughts swirling like mist, dissolving as I tried to grasp them. The footprints, the journal, what was I just thinking about? I squeezed my eyes shut, my breathing uneven. And then I heard it. A voice. A whisper, barely audible, carried on the still air. You're already part of it. My body locked up. My blood turned to ice. I turned toward the sound. The fog had thickened, rolling in like waves, and someone was standing in it, a silhouette, too distant to make out clearly. But I knew. It was watching me. I took a shaky step back toward my RV, my mind screaming at me to run. And then, the figure moved, not walking, gliding, straight toward me. I spun on my heel and bolted inside my RV, slamming the door shut and locking it. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the wall. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I reached for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. The screen was dark. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I grabbed my bag, fumbling for the car keys. My fingers brushed against something cold. Something metal. I pulled it out. A key. But not my RV key. A rusted, old motel key. I turned it over. The tag read, Cabin 13, Sun Haven Resort. My stomach flipped. Cabin 13? There were no cabins at Sun Haven. At least not last night. I hesitated for only a second before shoving the key in my pocket and heading back outside. If I didn't find out what was happening soon, I might not be able to remember at all. I followed the key. Something about it pulled me. The fog was so thick now, I could barely see past my own feet. My skin prickled with the overwhelming feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. And then, it appeared. A cabin. A decayed, rotting structure sitting at the very edge of the park. I knew deep in my bones that it hadn't been here before. The number on the door was faded, but I didn't need to see it to know. Cabin 13. My feet moved on their own. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. Inside was a single wooden chair. And sitting on the chair was a man, or what was left of him. His skin was paper-thin, stretched tight over bones, his eyes sunken, his lips barely parted. And in his skeletal hands was the same journal I had found in my RV. The pages were open to a single, final entry. My breath hitched as I read the last words scrawled there. You are the last guest. The air shifted. The man's head snapped upward, and he smiled. I couldn't move. The skeletal man's smile widened, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. I wanted to run, to bolt out of the decayed cabin and never look back. But my feet refused to move. The smell of rot filled my nostrils, thick and suffocating. The air felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. Slowly, too slowly, the man lifted a single, bony finger and pointed at the journal still resting in his lap. It took me a moment to understand. He wanted me to read. My hands shook as I reached for the worn pages, my fingers brushing against the dry, brittle bones of his wrist. The last entry was written in jagged, uneven letters. There is no escape. Sun Haven takes what it wants. You don't leave. You just forget until you belong. My stomach clenched. I flipped the page. More words, but this time they weren't old. They weren't faded. They were fresh. Run. A long, sharp breath rattled through the man's chest. And then, his head snapped violently backward. His entire body convulsed before crumbling to dust. I staggered away, my back hitting the cabin wall. I had to get out. Now. I burst out of the cabin, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fog was even thicker now, swirling unnaturally around me. The air smelled different, wrong. I ran back toward my RV, the path ahead shifting with each step. One moment, I was on gravel. The next, I was stepping through rotting wooden planks. A shiver crawled up my spine. I knew, without a doubt, that Sun Haven was rearranging itself, trying to trap me. My RV was just ahead, barely visible through the mist. I reached for the door, and stopped. Something was standing in front of it, a figure, tall, motionless, shrouded in the swirling fog. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt its eyes on me, watching, waiting. A lump formed in my throat, and then, it moved, not walking, gliding, straight toward me. I stumbled backward, my pulse thundering in my ears. The closer it got, the more the fog peeled away from its shape. It was wearing a uniform, the receptionist, the one from the check-in desk. But now her skin was ashen, stretched too tightly over her skull. Her lips pulled back in a grin that was too wide, too unnatural. And in her hands, she was holding a key. I turned to run, but the world had shifted again. My RV was gone. The road was gone. All that remained was the old version of Sun Haven, the one from the past. The one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The abandoned buildings, the crumbling RVs, the forgotten world of a resort that should have died decades ago. And I was stuck inside it. You're almost ready, the woman whispered. Her voice didn't match her mouth. The words came from behind me. I spun nothing. I turned back, she was closer. Sun Haven is always looking for guests. The words slithered around me, pressing into my thoughts, like a memory trying to replace my own. I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head. No, I muttered. No, I'm not staying here. She tilted her head, her empty gaze never leaving mine. You already are. She lifted the key, the same one I had found earlier, the one labeled Cabin 13. Take it, she said. Her smile never faltered. If you take it, you'll understand. I took a step back and bumped into something solid. I turned, my stomach dropping. Another figure stood behind me. A man, his face half decayed, his sunken eyes blank and lifeless. More figures began to emerge from the fog, one after another, silent, watching, their expressions frozen in vacant smiles. They all held keys, each one rusted, each one labeled with a number. And I realized, they were all past guests. They had never left. I spun back to the receptionist, my hands curling into fists. This isn't real, I shouted. Her grin widened. That's what they all say, she whispered. She reached out, pressing the key into my palm. And the moment I touched it, my mind split open. Suddenly, I was standing in the Real Sun Haven. The new Sun Haven. The one from last night. The resort was clean again, pristine, just as it had been when I first arrived. Guests walked the paths, chatting, laughing, enjoying their stay. A breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke. It was normal. I looked down at my hand. The key was gone. Everything was back to how it should be. I let out a shaky breath, my body sagging with relief. Maybe it really had been a dream. I turned, heading back to my RV. As I walked, I caught a glimpse of the reception office, and my blood ran cold. She was still there, the receptionist, standing behind the desk. Her gaze followed me. She lifted her hand and pressed a single finger to her lips. My stomach twisted. I forced myself to turn away, but as I climbed into my RV, I caught my reflection in the window, and for a split second, I saw myself grinning, too wide, too unnatural, like I had always belonged here. The world felt wrong. The RV park had returned to normal. No fog, no decayed buildings, no silent, grinning figures. It was morning now. The sun was up, birds were chirping, and families wandered the park, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the table inside my RV. My reflection in the window stared back, pale, exhausted, but normal. Had it all been a dream? No. I could still feel the rough texture of the key in my palm, even though it was gone now. I could still hear the receptionist's voice whispering in my head. You're almost ready. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my keys and threw open the RV door. Outside, everything looked perfect. The grass was green, the roads freshly paved, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine. I took a deep breath. Maybe it had been some kind of hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, something. But as I stepped outside, my foot crunched onto something. I looked down, and my stomach twisted. A key, sitting right in front of my RV door. The metal was rusted, ancient, the tag barely legible. But I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. Cabin 13. I kicked the key away and ran to the driver's seat. No more questioning. No more waiting. I was getting out. Now. The RV rumbled to life, the familiar hum of the engine grounding me for the first time in hours. I gripped the wheel, my fingers tight. The exit road stretched ahead, clean and welcoming. I pressed the gas. But as I approached the park's gates, they weren't there. I slammed the brakes. The road didn't end exactly. It just kept going, winding back into the park. I turned the wheel, searching for another route. The GPS showed only one road. No highways. No nearby towns. Just Sun Haven. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, my breathing ragged. I had just seen the exit when I arrived. It was real. I wasn't imagining it. But now, no matter which road I took, I always ended up back in the RV park. I sat in my driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, trying to control my breathing. The laughter of families outside fell off, like a recording playing on loop. I watched them closely. The way they moved. The way they smiled. Something was wrong. Their faces didn't quite match their voices. Their movements were too smooth, like puppets on invisible strings. A shadow passed outside my window. I turned, and there she was, the receptionist, standing right outside my RV. She didn't knock. She just smiled, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. I locked the door, my heart hammering. Go away, I muttered. She didn't. She just stood there, her lips moving, but the sound came from inside my head. It's easier if you don't fight it. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my temples. You'll forget soon. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? When I finally opened my eyes again, the world felt different. The fear in my chest had dulled. My thoughts felt slower. The road outside my RV looked normal again. The exit road was back. I blinked in confusion. Had I just imagined all of that? My head throbbed as I turned the ignition again. The RV started up smoothly. I hesitated, then pressed the gas. The wheels rolled forward. And this time, the road led me out. I felt the tension in my chest ease as I passed through the exit gates, my mind already beginning to brush aside the night's events. I had just been tired, stressed. Nothing strange had happened. Nothing at all. I glanced in my rearview mirror for one last look at Sun Haven, and for a split second, I saw myself still standing in the RV park, a second version of me, grinning, holding a rusted key. And then, the road twisted, and Sun Haven vanished from view. Days passed, then weeks. The memory of the strange night at Sun Haven began to fade, replaced by the mundane rhythm of driving, gas stations, rest stops, and new campsites. But sometimes, late at night, I would wake up with the faintest whisper in my head. You'll forget soon. And then, one evening, at a completely different RV park, I found something in my pocket. A key. Rusty. Worn. Cabin 13. I stared at it, my heart hammering. I was nowhere near Sun Haven. I had left. Hadn't I? My reflection in the RV window smiled at me. Too wide. Too unnatural. Like I had always belonged there. And maybe, just maybe, I still did. Next story. I've always loved road trips. There's something about the open highway, the endless possibilities stretching ahead, the sense of complete control over where you go and when you stop. There's comfort in a full tank of gas, a working GPS, and the knowledge that no matter how unfamiliar the roads, civilization is never too far behind. But that's what I used to think, before I found the road that shouldn't exist. It started like any other trip. I had taken some time off work to travel in my RV. No fixed plans, just me and the open road. The plan was simple: drive, camp, explore, repeat. I had my GPS set for a scenic route through the mountains, where a highly rated but lesser-known RV campground supposedly offered breathtaking views and total peace from the modern world. Sounded perfect. I had driven all day, stopping only for gas and a quick meal, when the sun started its descent behind the rolling hills. The sky turned into a streaked blend of deep oranges and purples, and I felt that familiar excitement of reaching a quiet spot just in time to settle in for the night. I checked my GPS. It said I was still about an hour out. The drive was beautiful, winding through thick forests and the occasional open stretch of farmland. I hadn't seen another car for miles, but that wasn't unusual on these back roads. What was strange, though, was how quiet it had become. No birds, no whine through the trees, no distant sounds of life. Just the soft hum of my tires on pavement and the occasional robotic voice from my GPS reassuring me I was on track. Then the first glitch happened. Recalculating. Take the next left. I frowned, glancing at the screen. That wasn't right. I was supposed to stay on this highway for another 20 miles before turning. I tapped at my phone, checking the route, but the screen flickered, then adjusted. The GPS insisted this was a faster way. I slowed down as I approached the turn. It was a narrow road, barely wide enough for two vehicles, surrounded by towering pine trees that swallowed the light. There were no street signs, no markers, no indication that this was a road anyone actually used. I hesitated. A weird gut feeling told me to keep driving, to stick to the original route. But then logic took over. GPS technology is designed to find the best way, right? Maybe this was a newly updated shortcut that just wasn't on the physical maps yet. Maybe it would save me time and gas. So I turned. The road was smooth at first, though it felt oddly untouched. No cracks, no signs of wear, no old tire marks. The deeper I went, the more I realized how strange it was. The trees on either side grew denser, almost leaning in. The further I drove, the narrower the road became. I turned on my high beams. The road signs, mile markers, any indication of civilization, were completely absent. I glanced at the GPS again. Nothing. The screen had gone black. I tapped it, checked my phone's signal, no bars. A small pit of unease formed in my stomach, but I shook it off. I had offline maps, and I knew I wasn't that far from my original route. I could always turn back if it got too weird, but something about the road made me keep going. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The trees were so thick now that the last traces of daylight had vanished entirely. My headlights barely seemed to cut through the darkness. I checked my dashboard clock. It had been 20 minutes since I turned, but it felt like I'd been driving for much longer. Then I saw it. A gas station ahead. Relief washed over me. I wasn't lost. There was still civilization nearby. Maybe I could stop, ask someone for directions, and figure out why my GPS was failing. But as I got closer, my stomach twisted. The gas station was wrong. The overhead lights flickered dimly, but there were no cars, no signs of life. The pumps were rusted and covered in grime, as if they hadn't been used in years. The windows of the station were dark, and the old sign creaked as it swayed in a wind I couldn't feel. The GPS screen flickered back on, but it wasn't showing my location. It displayed a distorted, static-filled image of my RV, as if I was watching myself from a camera outside. A cold wave of fear spread through me. I turned my gaze back toward the gas station, and my breath caught in my throat. A man stood just beyond the pumps, half hidden in the shadows. He wasn't moving, just standing there watching. I couldn't see his face. The headlights barely illuminated his figure, but I could make out something deeply unsettling. His posture was off, almost like a puppet being held up by invisible strings. Then he took a step forward. The GPS let out a distorted screech. I didn't wait. My foot slammed on the gas, and the RV lurched forward. I swerved back onto the road, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded as I sped away, glancing in the rearview mirror. The man hadn't moved. He was still there, standing motionless at the edge of the road. But the gas station was gone. I blinked, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Where the station had been was now just an empty stretch of trees, as if it had never been there in the first place. I had to get out of here. I checked the GPS again. It was back to normal, displaying a new route. The only problem? The road ahead didn't have a name. And when I checked my offline maps, the road I was on didn't exist. This was just the beginning. I should have turned around then. I should have stopped. But something about that road, something about the way the GPS kept whispering that I was almost there, kept me driving forward. I thought I could find my way out. I didn't realize I was never supposed to leave. The hum of the RV's tires against the asphalt was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. The night outside was a heavy black, broken only by the weak glow of the headlights. The road ahead stretched endlessly, flanked by towering trees whose branches reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers. I glanced at the GPS again. The road I was on wasn't on the screen. No connecting highways, no markers, no name. Just an empty void where pavement should be. Weird, I muttered. Leaning forward, I tapped the screen, zooming in and out. The GPS kept recalculating, the little blue arrow floating in empty space. A faint voice chimed in from the system. Continue for 13 miles. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe the system was just lagging. A glitch. But still, there was something unsettling about driving on a road that didn't officially exist. My fingers drummed against the wheel. I reached for my phone, flipping through a map app. Same issue. The road wasn't showing up. That didn't make sense. A lump formed in my throat. I told myself it was fine. The road was real. I could feel the tires gripping the pavement. The trees swayed in the wind. It was real. It had to be. Yet, something gnawed at me. A whisper at the back of my mind. Where did this road actually go? I tried to shake off the unease. The RV rumbled on, steady and strong, but I couldn't help feeling like something was off. I adjusted the rearview mirror. The road behind me stretched into darkness, disappearing into the void. It looked emptier than it should have. No distant glow of streetlights. No headlights from other travelers. Just endless, swallowing black. That wasn't normal. Even the most isolated highways had the occasional car. A set of headlights in the distance. A reflection of taillights fading behind. But here, nothing. Just me. Alone. A sharp shiver ran down my spine. I glanced at my fuel gauge. Just over half a tank. I'd be fine. I'd find a rest stop soon, figure out where I was. But as I kept driving, the road seemed unchanged. The same thick wall of trees. The same winding curves. I squinted at the passing scenery. Had I seen that twisted, gnarled tree before? The sensation crept in like a slow, crawling spider. The road was looping. I tightened my grip on the wheel. No, that wasn't possible. I had been driving in one direction the entire time. But then I saw it. A green road sign on the right side of the highway. No name, no number, just a blank, faded sign standing crookedly in the dirt. I knew I had passed that exact same sign 20 minutes ago. My pulse spiked. I swallowed hard, trying to rationalize. Maybe there were multiple signs. Maybe I was imagining things. But my gut twisted with dread. Something was wrong with this road. The clock is wrong. The unease grew heavier by the mile. I checked the dashboard clock. 2:43 a.m. Then I glanced at my phone. 1:12 a.m. I frowned. That wasn't right. I locked and unlocked my phone, refreshing the screen. It still read 1:12 a.m. I checked my watch. Different time again. The realization settled in my stomach like a rock. Time wasn't behaving normally here. I tapped the GPS again. It flickered. The screen dimmed. Then, continue for 13 miles. My breath hitched. I had been driving for at least 40 minutes since I first heard that instruction. My foot eased off the accelerator. I wasn't getting anywhere. The realization hit like ice water. I was stuck. I forced myself to take deep breaths. I needed to focus. There had to be an explanation. Then movement. Out of the corner of my eye, in the side mirror. Something shifted behind the RV. I turned my head, scanning the road. Nothing. Just the empty stretch of pavement behind me. I adjusted the mirror, my pulse quickening. Then, a shadow darted between the trees. Not a deer. Not a coyote. Something tall. Thin. Moving unnaturally fast. I jerked forward, staring into the mirror, my breath hitching. Nothing. I swallowed hard, my grip on the wheel tightening. I wasn't alone out here. I needed to stop. I couldn't keep driving in circles. I had to figure out where the hell I was. Then up ahead, a gas station. A flickering neon sign buzzed in the distance, a lone building surrounded by nothing but darkness. I exhaled in relief. Finally, a place to stop. I pulled into the lot, the headlights washing over the cracked pavement. The station looked old. Too old. Like it had been abandoned for years. Yet, the lights were on. A dim glow bled through the windows. A faded, open sign buzzed faintly near the door. I hesitated. Something wasn't right. But I needed answers. Taking a deep breath, I killed the engine and stepped outside. The air was too still. No wind. No rustling trees. Not even the hum of distant insects. I walked toward the entrance, my footsteps too loud in the silence. Through the glass, I could see shelves lined with dusty cans and faded snack wrappers. No cashier. No customers. Just the humming refrigerator lights flickering at the back. A single bell jingled as I pushed the door open. Then, a voice. Soft. Barely above a whisper. You shouldn't be here. I froze. The voice wasn't coming from behind the counter. It was coming from the aisles. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a figure standing between the shelves. Too still. Too tall. A shiver ran through me. The fluorescent light flickered, and the figure moved. The unexplainable intensifies, 2,000 words. A silent world. The gas station door creaked as it swung shut behind me. The air inside was thick, stale, unmoving, as if no one had breathed it for years. Yet, the lights were on. The refrigerators hummed softly. A faint static crackled from an unseen speaker, like a radio station barely tuned in. I took a slow step forward. My boots scuffed against the old linoleum, the sound too loud in the eerie stillness. The figure I had seen between the aisles was gone. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. I didn't imagine it. I knew I saw someone. You shouldn't be here. The voice came again. Soft. Right behind me. I spun around, my breath catching. No one. The door was closed. The parking lot outside was empty. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. My skin prickled as I turned back toward the counter. There was an old cash register, covered in a thin layer of dust. Beside it, a yellowed map lay spread out on the counter. My eyes narrowed. It was the same map I had in my glove compartment. The same one I had been following. Only, this version had no roads at all. Just empty land, twisting rivers, endless forests. No highways. No exits. The pen marks I had made earlier, circling my route, marking the gas stations I planned to stop at, were all still there. But the roads themselves were gone. Erased. Like they had never existed. My throat tightened. I reached out with a shaking hand, my fingers barely brushing the paper. The lights flickered. A sudden, sharp knock rattled the glass door behind me. I froze. It wasn't the sound of knuckles. It was too heavy, too deliberate. like something pressing its entire weight against the glass. Slowly, I turned my head. A shadow loomed behind the door. Tall, thin, too tall. The flickering light made its shape jitter, like an image struggling to load on a glitching screen. I took a step back. The thing outside tilted its head. It knew I saw it. I bolted for the RV. I didn't look back. Didn't wait. I shoved open the door, jumped into the driver's seat, and jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Headlights washed over the empty gas station, casting long shadows. The figure was gone, but I wasn't relieved. I threw the RV into drive, tires skidding as I sped back onto the road. The GPS flickered to life again. Continue for 13 miles. My hands tightened around the wheel. I wasn't falling for it this time. I flicked the screen off and gritted my teeth, focusing on the dark road ahead. I just had to keep driving. I'd find a town, a real gas station, people. But as the miles stretched on, a horrible realization crawled through me. The road was changing. The curves weren't where they should be. The trees didn't match. Even the moon was in a different position than it had been minutes ago. It was like the road was shifting, rearranging itself, keeping me inside of it. I drove for what felt like forever. The dashboard clock hadn't moved. Still 2:43 a.m. But the further I went, the more wrong everything became. The street signs were blank. The mile markers were counting backward. And the trees, God, the trees were moving. Not in the wind, they were stepping closer. Each time I glanced away, they inched toward the road, closing in. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my foot pressing the gas pedal harder. I needed to get out. I needed. Turn left. A voice whispered from the passenger seat. I jerked violently, my hands clenching the wheel. There was no one in the seat next to me. But I heard it, right beside me. Soft. Calm. Wrong. Turn left, it whispered again. My knuckles went white. There's no left turn, I whispered back, throat dry. Silence. And then, the GPS, which I had turned off, flickered back to life on its own. The map redrew itself. A left turn appeared up ahead. A road that hadn't been there before. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was desperate. Maybe I was tired. Or maybe something else was nudging my mind, guiding my hands. Either way, I turned. The tires rolled onto a narrow dirt path. Tall trees swallowed the road. The headlights barely reached beyond the suffocating darkness. I drove slowly now, every nerve in my body screaming for me to stop. But I couldn't. Something was waiting ahead. I felt it, watching, expecting. And then, the RV lurched. The tires screeched as I slammed the brakes, the entire vehicle jerking forward. I sucked in a sharp breath. The road had ended. Abruptly, right in front of me. Beyond it, a sheer drop-off. A cliff? No, not a cliff. A void. A chasm of endless black, stretching forever. No bottom. No sky. No stars. Just nothing. And then I realized. The road behind me was gone. I was trapped. There was no turning around. No reversing. I gripped the wheel, my breath shallow. Then, a shadow moved. Not in the trees. In the void. Something crawling up from the blackness. A shape. Tall. Thin. Its limbs too long. Its head tilted at an impossible angle. I knew that shape. It was the same one that had stood outside the gas station. And now, it was here. The headlights barely illuminated its form. But I could see its mouth. A grin. Too wide. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed at my dashboard. At the clock, 2:43 a.m. The same time. The same second. Frozen. Then, the clock began counting backward. 2:42 a.m. 2:41 a.m. 2:40 a.m. Faster. Spinning. I clamped my hands over my ears as a deafening whisper filled the RV. You shouldn't be here. The lights cut out. The RV was plunged into total darkness. And I knew. Whatever was in the void was now inside with me. The world is coming apart. The RV was gone. Or maybe I was gone. I couldn't tell anymore. The second the lights cut out, I felt a stomach-churning shift, like the floor had dropped out beneath me. My hand still clutched the wheel, but it was cold, smooth wrong. I wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. I wasn't in the RV at all. I was in the driver's seat again. The headlights flickered weakly, illuminating the nothingness ahead. My body jerked violently forward as the RV lurched into reverse on its own. The wheel spun wildly, my hands powerless to stop it. I could barely breathe. I barely had time to register what was happening before the engine roared. and the entire RV launched backward down the twisting road. Faster, faster. The trees blurred past the windows, too fast, too many, their forms unnatural, stretching, bending, leaning inward like skeletal hands reaching for me. The road shouldn't exist. I knew that. I had seen it disappear. But here I was, hurtling down it at breakneck speed, back toward whatever had been waiting for me all along. Then all at once, the RV slammed to a dead stop. My head whipped forward, cracking against the wheel. Dazed, I blinked through the pain, trying to focus. Something was in the headlights. And this time, it wasn't moving. I should have turned the lights off. I should have killed the engine. I should have never followed the map. But it was too late. The figure stood directly in front of me, fully illuminated. It wasn't human. It had a shape, arms, legs, a head, but everything was off. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent wrong, its skin an ashen, colorless gray. It had no eyes, just dark, hollow pits where they should have been. But worst of all, it was smiling, too wide, too knowing. And then, it spoke, but the voice wasn't deep or monstrous. It wasn't guttural or growling. It was my voice. You shouldn't be here. My own voice echoed through the RV, sending a violent shudder down my spine. I shook my head. No. The thing smiled wider. You've been here before, it whispered. The headlights flickered. The road behind me was gone again. Only blackness remained. A suffocating, endless void. And then, the world changed. The RV was no longer an RV. The road was no longer a road. Everything folded, twisted, unraveled, like a map being crumpled and rewritten. And suddenly I was somewhere else. I was standing, no longer in the driver's seat, no longer in the RV. The air was thick with that awful, electric hum, and stretched before me, an endless highway, straight, infinite, completely devoid of signs, markings, or exits. The pavement was cracked and worn, riddled with faded tire marks, as if countless others had driven this road before. And in the distance, headlights, far, far ahead, a vehicle was coming toward me. I took a shaky step forward, then, a soft rustling. Behind me, I turned, and there it was, the thing, closer now, almost within reach. I staggered back, but there was nowhere to go. The headlights in the distance were growing brighter. And then I realized, it was my RV. It was me driving. I saw my own silhouette through the windshield, driving toward myself, watching myself, and just as the headlights reached me, everything snapped to black. I woke up, in the driver's seat. The RV was idling at a gas station. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. The GPS screen was glowing softly. I swallowed hard, my pulse thundering. The road ahead was normal. The world was normal. But something was wrong. Something I couldn't shake. And then, the receipt printer at the counter whirred. I jumped. The gas station clerk, a tired-looking old man, sighed and tore the paper free. "Here's your receipt," he mumbled, holding it out. I hesitated. He glanced up at me, frowning. "You okay?" I stared at him. Then slowly I reached for the receipt. My fingers brushed the paper, and my stomach dropped. The ink on the receipt was smudged, blurred, wrong. But I could still make out the words. "You shouldn't be here. A return that isn't a return." I stared at the gas station receipt. "You shouldn't be here." The words were slightly smudged, the ink looking almost wet, like it had just been printed. I swallowed hard. The clerk's voice barely registered. "You okay, man?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't breathe. I turned the receipt over, my fingers trembling, half expecting the back to be blank. It wasn't. Something else was written there. "Go back." I dropped it like it burned. The gas station felt wrong now. Too quiet, too empty. Something had changed. I wasn't supposed to be here. Or worse, I never left. I pushed open the RV door, stepping out into the gas station lot, my boots crunching against the pavement. The night air felt different. Thicker. The gas station looked the same, but the parking lot was too empty. No other cars. No road noise. Even the sky looked wrong. Too dark, too vast, like the world ended just beyond the parking lot. My RV sat there, humming softly. Waiting. I turned, looking back through the window. The clerk wasn't there anymore. The counter was empty. The lights flickered. And then, the receipt machine printed again. I didn't pick it up. I backed away. The gas station was abandoned. Had it always been? Was I ever here at all? I turned to the GPS screen, my fingers cold as I touched the screen. It flickered once, then twice. Then a new route appeared. No roads, no landmarks, Just an arrow pointing forward. Continue 12 miles. I should have ignored it. I should have turned around. But something compelled me. I put the RV into drive. The tires crunched against gravel, and then I was moving. The gas station faded in my rear view. Or maybe it had never been there at all. The world outside was wrong. The trees were too tall, their branches arching over the road, forming a twisted canopy. The headlights barely cut through the darkness. I checked the GPS again. 11 miles left. I gripped the wheel tighter. The road stretched endlessly ahead. Blacktop faded into something else. Something smoother. Something too perfect. Like the road itself was being made as I drove. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. There was nothing behind me. No road. No gas station. Just blackness. Like the world was unraveling the second I passed through it. I slammed on the brakes. The RV skidded to a stop. I checked the GPS again. The screen flickered. Then, continue 9 miles. I wasn't supposed to stop. I was supposed to keep driving. I put the RV in reverse. Nothing happened. The wheels spun uselessly against the pavement. The road wouldn't let me go. A soft noise. A breath. From behind me. I didn't turn around. I saw it in the rearview mirror. A shadow in the back of the RV. Not moving. Not breathing. Just watching. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. The shadow shifted. Not stepping forward, just changing. Like it was unfolding itself. Like it was never meant to be seen in this form. Then, it grinned. And in my own voice it spoke. You found the road. Now drive. I didn't remember putting the RV into drive. I didn't remember pressing the gas. But suddenly, I was moving again. Faster this time. The world outside was twisting, shifting. The trees warping like they were being stretched into something else. The GPS blinked. 6 miles left. The shadow in the back seat was gone. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Feel them. Things just beyond my vision, shifting in the corners of my headlights. I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn around. I could only keep driving. The GPS blinked again. 3 miles left. Then, a road sign appeared. No words. Just an arrow. Pointing down. Like the road was about to descend into something deeper. Something waiting for me. The road tilted downward. Steep. Like I was driving into the earth itself. The GPS flashed. Final destination ahead. The headlights flickered. Then, just before the road plunged into blackness, I saw something ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded. The RV lurched to a stop. And there, standing directly in the headlights, was me. My own face. My own clothes. Standing in the road. Smiling. And in my voice it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The headlights flickered. The world snapped to black. I woke up. The RV was idling at a gas station. The GPS screen glowed softly. My hands were clutching the wheel. My heart thundered in my chest. I looked around. The road outside was normal. The world was normal. I exhaled. It was just a dream. Just a soft whir. The receipt machine. I turned slowly. The gas station clerk sighed, tearing off the slip of paper. "Here's your receipt," he muttered. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The ink was smudged. The letters blurred. But I could still read them. "Welcome back." My breath caught. I turned to the GPS screen. A new route had appeared. A road that didn't exist. A destination that had no name. And the words, "Continue 12 miles." My hands shook. The RV hummed softly, waiting for me to decide. Was I trapped? Had I ever escaped? I looked at the receipt again, then at the GPS. The road stretched ahead, and in the mirror, something smiled at me. Next story is, I've always liked driving at night. There's something calming about the open road when the world is quiet, when the only sounds are the soft hum of the tires and the occasional chirp of crickets beyond the window. My RV, old but reliable, had been my home for the past 6 months. No fixed address, no real plans, just the road and me, heading wherever the next stretch of highway took me. That night, I was somewhere deep in Arizona, driving along a desolate road that barely had a name. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. The gas station back in the last town had been the only sign of life for a while, and even that had felt half abandoned. I wasn't in a rush, so I pulled into a rest stop when I saw one. Just a small dirt lot beside a faded wooden sign that read. There was no canyon in sight, just an open patch of desert beyond the road, stretching endlessly into the dark. A single dim streetlight flickered at the edge of the lot, casting a dull glow over the cracked pavement. I parked the RV near the edge, away from the single other vehicle in the lot, a rusted old sedan with no visible occupants, probably left there by someone hitching a ride elsewhere. I killed the engine and let out a breath. The stillness settled over me immediately, thick and absolute. It was just another night, or so I thought. I had just stepped out to stretch my legs when I saw it. A suitcase. It sat directly in front of my RV's door, as if someone had placed it there intentionally. For a moment, I just stared at it. It was old, a deep brown leather, worn at the edges, with tarnished brass buckles. A luggage tag dangled from the handle, the ink too smudged to read. I glanced around the lot. The rusted sedan hadn't moved. There were no other cars. No people. Had someone left it here? I walked forward cautiously and nudged it with my boot. It didn't move much, heavier than it looked. Something about it made my skin prickle. I'd been to plenty of rest stops, seen plenty of weird things left behind. But something about this, about the way it was positioned right at my door, like it had been waiting for me, felt off. I leaned down, fingers brushing the cool leather, and lifted it, too heavy for just clothes. I considered opening it right there but hesitated. There was a strange feeling building in my chest, a nervous, crawling sensation I couldn't quite explain. Instead, I sighed and carried it inside. I'd check it in the morning. As I shut the RV door, I had the strangest thought. I hadn't heard anyone set it down. Sleep didn't come easy. Maybe it was the unfamiliar weight of the suitcase sitting by the door. Maybe it was just the eerie quiet outside. I wasn't usually so jumpy. But that night, every little creak in the RV made me tense. At one point, I thought I heard something shift inside the suitcase. A soft rustling sound. I told myself it was just settling. The leather creaking. Nothing more. I turned over and shut my eyes. Hours later, a noise pulled me awake. Tap, tap, tap. A soft knocking sound. Not from the door. From inside the RV. I held my breath. Silence. I turned my head slowly, my eyes adjusting to the dim glow from the microwave clock across the small space. The suitcase was still by the door. Closed. Nothing moved. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe my brain was making shapes out of the dark, playing tricks on me. After a while, I forced myself to close my eyes again. But the feeling didn't leave. A strange sensation, like someone was sitting just outside my peripheral vision watching. I woke up late, sunlight already creeping through the blinds. For a moment, everything felt normal. The night before seemed like a foggy, half-remembered dream. Then I saw it. The suitcase was no longer by the door. It was now sitting at the foot of my bed. I stared. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't moved it. I knew I hadn't. I sat up slowly, my skin crawling. The suitcase was closed, just as before. But something was different. The leather looked damp, as if it had been left in the rain. I reached out hesitantly, running my fingers over the surface. It was cold to the touch. I exhaled sharply and rubbed the back of my neck. Okay. Think logically. Maybe I had moved it in my sleep. Maybe I'd been half awake and didn't remember. But that didn't explain the moisture. And it didn't explain the faint scent of cigarette smoke that now clung to the air. I glanced toward the windows. All locked. The door too. No one had come inside. I swallowed the growing unease in my throat and forced myself to move. Enough was enough. I needed to open it. I grabbed the latches, hesitated for just a second, then flipped them open. The suitcase unsealed with a soft, damp pop. I lifted the lid. Inside, neatly folded, were old clothes. A man's button-up shirt. A woman's dress, vintage-looking. A pair of brown slacks. But that wasn't what made my stomach drop. It was the journal, sitting perfectly centered on top of the clothes. Its cover was made of cracked black leather, worn from years of handling. And written across the front, in faded gold letters, was a name. A name that wasn't mine. I stared at the journal, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something about it made my hands feel numb. I reached for it, hesitating before my fingers made contact. Then, without thinking, I flipped it open. The first page was blank. The second held a short paragraph, written in shaky black ink. I frowned and leaned in closer. The words were smudged, as if they'd been written in a hurry. And as I read them, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. If you found this, it's already too late. Do not keep the suitcase. Do not keep driving. You are not alone. I felt my breath hitch. I quickly flipped to another page. This one was filled with dates. Some crossed out. Some left blank. and at the very bottom of the list, scrawled in uneven letters, today's date. I slammed the journal shut. My hands were shaking. A creeping, terrible realization settled in my chest. I hadn't been alone last night, and I wasn't alone now. I sat in the dim light of the RV, staring at the journal in my hands, trying to slow my breathing. The words I had read, if you found this, it's already too late. Do not keep the suitcase. Do not keep driving. You are not alone. The words echoed in my mind, scratching at the edges of rational thought. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe someone had left it here intentionally to freak someone out. But then, how had the suitcase moved on its own? And why did today's date appear at the bottom of the list in the journal? I glanced back at the suitcase. It shouldn't have been there at all. Yet it was. I needed to clear my head. I turned on the RV's sink, splashing cold water onto my face. My hands were still shaking. I looked up into the small mirror above the sink. My face looked pale, my eyes slightly sunken from the restless night. Behind me in the reflection, the suitcase sat open. The clothes inside were dry now, like the moisture had been absorbed or had never been there at all. I turned back around, my stomach nodding. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I forced myself to sit back down and grab the journal again. If I was going to figure this out, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I flipped through the pages, scanning the hurried handwriting, the crossed-out dates, the random scribbles in the margins. Then I saw it. A name, repeated over and over again throughout the journal. Elliot Grayson. My breath caught. The name felt familiar, but I didn't know why. The morning sun outside had turned the sky into a faded blue, but the uneasy feeling in my chest hadn't faded with it. I needed a break. Needed fresh air. I stepped outside the RV. The lot was empty. The rusted sedan from last night was gone. For some reason, that sent another shiver down my spine. The rest stop sign stood where it had before. Red Canyon Rest Stop, overnight parking allowed. But something was different. Something was off. The paint looked fresher, like it had just been put there. The cracks in the pavement that I remembered from last night, gone. Even the streetlight, the one that had flickered all night, now looked new, like the entire place had reset. I swallowed hard and pulled out my phone. I had no signal. That was impossible. I had checked my phone just before pulling in last night. I had full bars. I turned around slowly, scanning the landscape. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the road, untouched. No signs of another car. No signs that anyone else had ever been here. A creeping realization formed in my mind. Had I ever been here? Back inside the RV, I sat at the small dining table, flipping through the journal again. I needed to figure out what the hell was going on. I turned to the next page, heart hammering. The ink was smudged, like the writer had been in a rush. If you found this journal, then you stopped at the rest stop. If you stopped, then you have the suitcase. If you have the suitcase, it's already begun. I swallowed, my fingers tightening around the pages. I kept reading. The first thing you'll notice is time shifting. Little things at first. The cracks in the pavement disappearing. The sky looking just a little too clear. Then it gets worse. I sucked in a breath. I turned to the next page. You're probably doubting yourself now, thinking maybe you're just tired. Maybe you're just imagining things. But you're not. My throat went dry. I turned another page. If you're reading this now, then you've already seen the name. I froze. My gaze shot back to the previous pages. Elliot Grayson. I turned back to the entry. That name, Elliot Grayson, you've seen it already, haven't you? You don't know why it's familiar, but it is. That's because it knows you. I felt my stomach drop. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. I turned the page again, my fingers trembling. Look under the bed. My skin turned ice cold. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But my body moved anyway. I slowly lowered myself off the seat, onto my knees. And I lifted the fabric flap covering the small storage space beneath the RV bed. I almost didn't see it at first. It was tucked into the corner, half covered by a forgotten hoodie. A photograph. A faded, yellowed photograph. With shaking fingers, I pulled it out. It showed a man standing in front of an RV. My RV. And scrawled at the bottom, in ink that had begun to fade, Elliot Grayson. I choked on a breath. No, that was impossible. I scanned the image again, my eyes burning. The man in the photo, his face was blurred. Not like bad photography. Like the face had been erased. A name I knew but didn't know why. A place that had reset itself overnight. A journal that knew exactly what I was thinking. I felt lightheaded, my thoughts spiraling. Then, Thump. A noise outside. I whipped my head toward the door. Silence. Then, thump. Something had hit the RV. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the faded photograph in my hand. Elliot Grayson. The name meant nothing to me, yet it sent chills crawling down my spine. I looked back at the suitcase. It sat there as if waiting. Something about it felt wrong. I needed to get rid of it. I grabbed the suitcase, dragged it toward the RV door, and threw it out. It landed with a heavy thud onto the pavement outside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I took a breath, then another, bracing my hands against the counter. This was ridiculous. It was just a suitcase. Some poor traveler must have left it behind. Except the journal had said something else. If you have the suitcase, it's already begun. I shook my head, trying to push away the creeping dread. I'd leave the suitcase here. Someone else could deal with it. I took one last glance through the window. The suitcase sat where I had thrown it, motionless, harmless. But why did it feel like it was watching me? I fell into an uneasy sleep, my mind still tangled in thoughts of Elliot Grayson, the rest stop that had reset overnight, and the journal that seemed to know exactly what I was experiencing. I dreamt of whispers, a voice calling a name over and over. Elliot. It sounded like it was right next to me. I woke up gasping. A cold sweat clung to my skin. I sat up, rubbing my face. The RV was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I turned my head and froze. The suitcase. It was sitting in the middle of the floor, inside the RV, exactly where it had been before. I stared, my mind screaming that this was impossible. I had thrown it out. I had heard it hit the pavement. And yet it was back. My breathing turned shallow. I reached out a shaking hand and touched the handle. Ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. I didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to acknowledge it. But I had to know. I gritted my teeth, flipped open the latches, and lifted the lid. The scent of old fabric and dust filled my nostrils. Inside, the suitcase looked exactly the same. Clothes, a pair of shoes, a few books. But something was different. The journal. It was open now, and there was a new entry. I reached for it with trembling fingers, my pulse pounding in my ears. The ink was smudged, as if it had been written in a hurry. You threw it out, didn't you? It doesn't matter. It always comes back. I swallowed hard. I turned the page. Do not open the envelope. I froze. Envelope? I looked back at the suitcase, and there it was, a small, yellowed envelope, tucked neatly between the clothes. My hands shook as I reached for it. It felt strange in my fingers, too thick, too heavy, like whatever was inside was waiting. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. I tore the envelope open, and a single Polaroid slid onto the table. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold. It was a picture of me, taken from inside the RV, taken from behind me, as if someone had been standing right there. The man in the reflection. I bolted up, spinning around. Nothing. I was alone. But the air felt off, like someone had just left the room. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I grabbed my phone and pulled up my camera, switched it to selfie mode. I turned toward the mirror above the sink, holding my phone up, and my stomach dropped. There was someone else in the reflection. A man, standing right behind me. I whirled around. Nothing. I turned back to the mirror. The man was still there, closer now, his face blurred, like the one in the photograph, like it had been wiped away. The phone slipped from my hands. A rush of air brushed against my ear. And then, a whisper. Elliot, reality begins to collapse. I don't remember running outside. I don't remember throwing open the door and gasping for air. All I knew was that I needed to get out. The night air was thick with silence. I turned toward the road. The rest stop sign was gone. Not broken. Not knocked over. Just gone. I swallowed, trying to slow my breathing. Then I turned back toward the RV, and my stomach lurched. The suitcase was sitting outside now, right in front of the RV. But it wasn't the same. The lid was open, and it was empty. I felt my pulse spike. The suitcase had been full when I left. Where were the clothes? The books? The journal? A movement caught my eye. I turned my head, and saw them. The clothes, hung up inside the RV, neatly folded, like they had always belonged to me. The suitcase belongs to me now. My breathing turned shallow. The RV had changed. The bedspread was different. The small souvenirs I had picked up from roadside stops, gone. Instead, new ones had replaced them. Ones I didn't recognize. Ones that weren't mine. But the worst part was the photo on the counter. The one in the Polaroid. It had changed. The man in the picture was no longer standing behind me. He was sitting at the RV's dining table, smiling, like he had always been there, like he belonged here, and scrawled at the bottom of the Polaroid, Elliot Grayson. My hands trembled. I looked back toward the mirror, the blurred face in the reflection, and I finally understood. I whispered, voice barely above a breath, "Elliot." A cold hand touched my shoulder, and a voice whispered back, "Welcome home." He photo, the man with the blurred face, and the name scrawled across the bottom, Elliot Grayson. My breathing turned shallow as I stared at it. That name had appeared too many times now. The driver's license, the journal, the whispers in the night. Who the hell was Elliot Grayson? I picked up the journal again, flipping through the pages. I had read every entry, except one. The last page. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. "This is my final entry. I tried to leave. I swear I did. But the suitcase won't let me. Every time I throw it away, it comes back. Every time I run, I wake up back inside the RV. I thought it wanted me to remember something. But that's not it. It doesn't want me to remember. Asterisk, it wants me to forget. It wants me to become. If you're reading this, it's too late for you too." My pulse spiked. Too late? To what? I shut the journal with a snap, my hands shaking. This was insane. I grabbed the suitcase and yanked it toward the door. I didn't care if it came back. I didn't care if it followed me. I was getting the hell out of here. I wrenched open the RV door and the world outside was gone. No road. No gas station. No night sky. Just darkness. A vast, endless void. And the only thing that existed was the suitcase in my hands. A door that won't open. I slammed the door shut. My mind reeled. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I squeezed my eyes shut, counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. I opened the door again, and the outside world had changed. It was daylight now. A bright, warm morning. But not the gas station I had parked at. Not the road I had been traveling. This was a small, suburban street. The houses looked too perfect, like a still image from a frozen moment in time. No movement. No wind. No people. I stepped out cautiously, my boots hitting solid pavement. The sky above was an empty shade of white. I turned back to the RV. The suitcase was gone. Instead, the journal sat neatly on the driver's seat, open to a new entry. One that wasn't there before. My hands trembled as I picked it up. "You're home now, Elliot." My stomach dropped. I turned sharply, scanning the lifeless houses. One of them had an open door. A single house, standing at the end of the street. Waiting. I didn't want to go inside. But I had to. Something was pulling me forward. Inside the forgotten house. The moment I stepped into the house, the door slammed shut behind me. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old memories. Furniture covered in white sheets. A fireplace filled with cold ashes. It was abandoned. And yet, it felt like someone had just left. I moved cautiously through the house, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's when I saw it. The suitcase. Sitting in the center of the living room. Waiting for me. My breath hitched. This wasn't possible. It was inside the RV. And yet, here it was. My hands curled into fists. I wasn't going to run this time. I was going to end this. I approached the suitcase, flipped the latches, and threw it open. It was empty, except for a single Polaroid. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, and my entire world shattered. It was a photo of me, standing in this exact room, with a woman and a little girl. The woman's face was blurred. The little girl's face was blurred. But I knew. I knew who they were. I didn't just recognize this house. I had lived here. The truth was never lost. It was taken. Memories came crashing back. The scent of fresh coffee in the kitchen. Laughter echoing through the halls. A child's voice calling, "Daddy, wake up!" I stumbled back, the Polaroid slipping from my fingers. No, this wasn't possible. I wasn't married. I didn't have a child. I didn't. I turned sharply, catching my reflection in a darkened window. And my breath hitched. The man staring back at me wasn't me. He had my height, my build. But his face, it was blurred. Just like the Polaroid. Just like the man in the mirror. Just like Elliot Grayson. And I realized I had never found someone else's suitcase. The suitcase had found me. It had never belonged to Elliot Grayson. It had belonged to me. And now, I was just another name in the journal. Another traveler who had forgotten who they were. Until it was too late. The house around me began to fade. The walls peeled away like burning paper. And in their place, the inside of the RV. I was back, sitting at the dining table. The suitcase was closed again. The journal was gone. The Polaroid, now resting neatly beside a driver's license. The name on the license had changed. It no longer read Elliot Grayson. It read my name. A sharp knock sounded at the RV door. My breath hitched. Through the window, I saw a figure standing outside. A traveler, a new traveler, looking confused, holding a suitcase. I knew exactly what they were about to ask, and I knew exactly what I was going to say. Come on in. You must be tired. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the suitcase. It had happened again. No matter what I did, no matter how many times I tried to throw it away, it always came back. And now, someone was knocking at the RV door. A slow, deliberate knock. 3 soft raps, each one vibrating through the silent space. I turned toward the window. A shadowed figure stood outside. They were holding something. A suitcase. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized them. I couldn't say how or why, but I knew. They looked just as lost as I had felt the night I first found the luggage. And now, as I sat frozen, I could feel it. Something inside me was shifting. Something was replacing me. The traveler who wasn't me. I squeezed my eyes shut. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But when I opened them again, the RV felt different. Like it wasn't mine anymore. Like I had been in here too long. The knock came again. More insistent. I forced myself to my feet, but my body felt heavy. Like something was pulling me backward. Like the very air inside the RV was trying to hold me in place. I gritted my teeth and took a step forward, then another, and another, until I reached the door. I hesitated. A part of me didn't want to open it. A part of me knew that if I did, it would mean something terrible. But my hand moved anyway. I grasped the handle and pulled it open. A cold gust of wind rushed past me, carrying a scent I recognized but couldn't name. The traveler looked up at me. Their face was familiar. Too familiar. A sharp pain stabbed through my skull. Memories flickered, but they weren't mine. Not exactly. I saw flashes of other roads, other nights, other lives. And one thing was always the same. The suitcase. Always returning. Always waiting for the next traveler to claim it. A voice that wasn't mine. I opened my mouth to say something. But the words that came out weren't what I meant to say. They weren't mine. Come on in. You must be tired. The traveler hesitated. Then they stepped inside. And just like that, I felt it. A pull. Like I was being dragged backward. Like I was no longer the one standing in the doorway. Like I had been pushed aside. The traveler set their suitcase down. They looked around with wide, uncertain eyes. I wanted to warn them. I wanted to tell them not to touch it. That it wasn't just a suitcase. That it was something else. But I couldn't. Because I wasn't really there anymore. I was watching from somewhere else. Somewhere just behind the glass. Like a reflection. Like a memory. Like a ghost. The cycle begins again. The traveler sat down at the table, running their hands over the worn leather suitcase. Their fingers traced the edges of the faded initials. The same ones I had stared at night after night. The same ones that had belonged to Elliot Grayson. Except now, they didn't say Elliot Grayson. They said my name. I felt something crack inside me. Like my mind was trying to resist something inevitable. Something that had already happened. I turned to the window, and for the first time, I saw my own reflection. But it wasn't me. Not exactly. The face looking back was blurry. Distorted. Fading. I pressed my hands to the glass. But I couldn't feel it. Because I wasn't there. Not really. I was just an echo. Just like Elliot Grayson. Just like the ones who came before me. I was part of the luggage now. Part of the thing that always returns. The thing that always finds someone new. Someone like me. Someone like the traveler now sitting at the table. Reaching for the zipper. Opening the suitcase. The traveler pulled out a journal. It was old, the pages yellowed and creased. The same one I had found when it all started. They flipped to the last page. And as they read, I already knew what it said. Because I had written it. This is my final entry. I tried to leave. I swear I did. But the suitcase won't let me. Every time I throw it away, it comes back. Every time I run, I wake up back inside the RV. I thought it wanted me to remember something. But that's not it. It doesn't want me to remember. Asterisk, it wants me to forget. It wants me to become. If you're reading this, it's too late for you too. The traveler's breath hitched. Their hands shook. Their reflection in the dark window flickered. And I knew. I knew what was happening. They were already starting to forget. An endless road. The RV was moving now, but I wasn't the one driving. I didn't know who was, or where we were going, but I could feel it. That same pull, that same inevitable destination. The road stretched on, and the longer we drove, the more I could feel myself fading, drifting further into the reflection, into the space where Elliot Grayson had disappeared before me. The last thing I saw was the traveler turning toward the window, looking for their own reflection, only to realize it wasn't there anymore. Next story is, I've always loved road trips. There's something hypnotic about the hum of tires against asphalt, the ever-changing horizon, the quiet intimacy of the road. It's like the world pauses, giving you time to breathe, to exist between destinations. But if I had known that stretch of road would lead me somewhere I could never leave, I never would have turned off the highway. We had been driving for hours. My girlfriend Lauren was dozing in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, lips slightly parted in sleep. The radio played a soft murmur of static, no signal strong enough to hold a station out here. Trees lined both sides of the road, their dark forms stretching up and twisting together overhead, blotting out most of the late afternoon sky. It gave the impression that we were tunneling forward, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. I glanced at the GPS. The screen flickered, recalculating, as if struggling to understand where we were. I frowned, tapping the screen. Recalculating. The voice was flat and mechanical, then the route refreshed. According to it, the nearest town was still over 60 miles away. Lauren stirred beside me, rubbing her eyes. Where are we? About an hour out, I think. She yawned, stretching. Feels like we've been driving forever. I nodded. It did feel longer than it should have. Maybe it was just the monotony of the landscape. The road had been the same for the past 2 hours, straight, unbroken, with no turns, no intersections. Just an endless stretch of asphalt cutting through the dense trees. A feeling I couldn't quite name settled into my chest. Something off. I checked the fuel gauge. Half a tank left. We'd be fine until the next town, but I'd hoped to stop sooner. Lauren was scrolling through her phone. No signal. Yeah, mine cut out a while ago. She sighed, leaning her head back against the seat. I hate roads like this. They always feel wrong. I gave her a curious glance. Wrong how? She hesitated. I don't know. Just like we're driving in place, you know? Like nothing's actually changing. I didn't respond right away, because I understood exactly what she meant. I had been feeling the same thing. The road looked the same no matter how far we drove. The same towering trees, the same dips and rises in the pavement. Even the mile markers looked identical, as if we were looping past them again and again. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I shook it off. It's probably just the isolation. No landmarks, no traffic. Feels like a treadmill. Lauren hummed in agreement, but didn't look convinced. Then we saw it. A lone gas station sign, glowing weakly through the trees. A relief I hadn't realized I needed flooded through me. There we go, I said. We'll stop, stretch, maybe grab some coffee. Lauren nodded, already looking more at ease. We drove in silence for the next 2 miles, and then, as promised, a small, rundown gas station appeared on the right side of the road. It looked like it had been there for decades. The paint on the sign was faded, peeling away in long strips, but the lights inside were still on. I pulled in and parked by the only working pump. The air outside was thick with the smell of damp earth and gasoline. The silence was wrong. There were no crickets, no rustling leaves, just an unnatural stillness that pressed against my ears. Lauren stepped out, hugging herself against the slight evening chill. This place is creepy. I forced a chuckle. Old, but it's got gas. That's all that matters. She nodded, but kept glancing around like she expected something to lunge out from the trees. I went inside to pay. The store was dimly lit, the fluorescent bulbs buzzing faintly overhead. An old man stood behind the counter, motionless. He watched me with a peculiar intensity, his skin ashen under the artificial light. I cleared my throat. Pump 1. He didn't move, didn't blink. Then, after a moment too long, he nodded slowly. Heading far? Just passing through. Another pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Be careful on that road." A chill rippled through me. I forced a small laugh. "Yeah, it's pretty empty out there." "No," he murmured, his gaze unwavering. "It's not." I stared at him, unsure how to respond. Before I could say anything else, he turned away, disappearing through a door behind the counter. I stood there for a second, unsettled. Then I shook my head and walked back to the RV. Lauren had already gotten back inside, her fingers tapping anxiously on her knee. "Ready?" I asked, trying to shake off the weirdness. She gave a small nod, but her eyes were fixed on something behind me. "What is it?" She blinked, her expression confused. "I thought I saw a road sign back there when we pulled in, but now it's gone." I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing but darkness and trees. "Weird," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Maybe you just saw something in the trees." "Yeah, maybe." I started the engine and pulled back onto the road. The gas station's flickering sign disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the shadows. A few miles down the road, Lauren gasped. "What?" I asked, glancing at her. She was staring out the window, her face pale. "The gas station." I followed her gaze, and my stomach turned to ice. The gas station was there, on the side of the road, exactly as we had left it. The peeling sign, the single working pump, the dim glow of the interior lights. "That's impossible," I whispered. Lauren turned to look at me, her breathing shallow. "We've been driving straight. How are we back here?" I didn't have an answer. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I pressed the gas pedal harder, the RV picking up speed. The headlights cut through the night, illuminating the empty road ahead. We drove for another 15 minutes, saying nothing, both of us hyper-aware of every detail, every shadow. Then we saw it again. The gas station. In the exact same place. Lauren's hand shot out, gripping my arm. "What the hell is happening?" I didn't answer. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize, to make sense of something that shouldn't be possible. I slowed down, my breath unsteady. Then, for the first time that night, I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind us was gone. Nothing but a wall of trees. My stomach dropped. My pulse roared in my ears. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper. "Where's the road?" I had no answer. Because we were trapped, and the road had faded from existence. I woke up to the rhythmic patter of rain on the RV's roof. The storm had rolled in overnight, transforming what had been a peaceful roadside stop into something almost oppressive. The inside of the RV was dim, the morning light struggling to pierce through thick, gray clouds. I blinked the sleep from my eyes and checked the time, 7:30 a.m. Something felt off. The night before, we had driven down a long stretch of road until we found a quiet turnout near a wooded area. It had seemed like a perfect place to rest. No other vehicles, no lights, just pure isolation. But as I sat up, stretching the stiffness from my limbs, I realized something unsettling. The road behind us was gone. I shook my head, pushing away the remnants of sleep. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right place. Slipping on my boots, I unlatched the door and stepped outside. A sharp chill hit me, the morning air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. My boots squelched against the damp ground as I walked toward where the road had been. Only there was nothing there. No pavement, no gravel, not even tire tracks from where we had driven in. Just an unbroken stretch of forest, thick and dark, extending as far as the eye could see. A deep unease settled in my stomach. I turned back toward the RV, half expecting to see my partner, Sam, watching me with a bemused expression, but the windows remained dark. I took a slow breath, grounding myself. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe we had parked closer to the tree line than I remembered. Maybe the rain had washed away the tracks. Maybe I was still dreaming. I walked around the RV, my hands trailing along its wet metal exterior. The front end faced the same empty road we had driven in on, stretching forward into the mist-covered horizon. I retraced my steps to the back of the vehicle, expecting, no needing, to see the familiar gray pavement reappear. But the forest loomed, silent and vast. My pulse quickened. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees for any sign of a clearing, a break in the dense foliage, a glimpse of the road I knew had been there just hours ago. But there was nothing, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. I forced myself to think rationally. If I had made a mistake, if we had somehow pulled off into a deeper part of the woods without realizing it, then all I had to do was follow the direction we had driven in from. The road had to be somewhere nearby. I walked forward, pushing through damp underbrush. Twigs cracked underfoot, and the air grew thick with the scent of wet leaves and bark. I counted my steps, 20, 30, 40. My breathing was steady, controlled. After 100 steps, I stopped. Still no road. I turned back to check my bearings. The RV was barely visible through the trees now, a faint silver shape against the green. A spike of unease tightened my chest. It felt wrong, as if the forest had swallowed the road whole, erasing it like it had never existed. The wind picked up, rustling the canopy above. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, a steady drum against the unnatural quiet. My fingers curled into fists. I needed to wake Sam. He would know what to do. I hurried back to the RV, my steps faster, more urgent. When I reached the door, I hesitated. A strange sensation prickled at the base of my skull, an instinctual warning that something was wrong. I turned, scanning the tree line. Something moved. A flicker, barely noticeable in the mist. My breath hitched, and I squinted, trying to see through the shifting shadows. The movement stopped, the trees still once more. Maybe it had just been a trick of the light. The morning fog had thickened, curling around the trunks like ghostly fingers. I swallowed hard and climbed back into the RV, locking the door behind me. Sam was still asleep, their form curled beneath a thick blanket. The interior of the RV felt unnaturally quiet, the hum of the outside world seemingly cut off. I reached out, gripping their shoulder gently. "Sam," I murmured. "Wake up!" A groggy noise escaped from under the covers. Sam stirred, rubbing their eyes. "What time is it?" "Something's wrong." That got their attention. Sam sat up, blinking at me. "What do you mean?" "The road is gone." They frowned, running a hand through their messy hair. "What?" "I mean it's gone. I went out to check, and there's just forest. No tire tracks, no pavement, nothing." Sam swung their legs over the side of the bed, their expression shifting from confusion to concern. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know." Without another word, Sam grabbed a jacket and followed me outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, the air thick and damp. We walked around to the back of the RV, and I watched as Sam's face fell. They took a few cautious steps forward, glancing around. "You're sure we didn't just pull in deeper than we thought?" I nodded. I walked out, trying to find it. "It's not there." Sam exhaled sharply, running a hand down their face. "Okay, maybe our phones can help." We hurried back inside. I grabbed my phone from the counter and tapped the screen. No service. My stomach twisted. "Yours?" I asked. Sam checked. Nothing. A heavy silence settled between us. I forced a breath. "Okay, maybe we just need to drive forward. The road has to be ahead of us somewhere." Sam nodded, but their expression was tight. We both climbed into the front seats, the familiar interior of the RV suddenly feeling too small, too enclosed. Sam turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life, a comforting sound amidst the growing dread. Slowly, we started forward. The tires rolled smoothly over the wet ground, and for a moment, I let myself hope. We would drive until we found another road, another landmark, something. But as we moved, something gnawed at the back of my mind. The trees looked the same. No variation, no signs of previous travelers. Just an endless stretch of towering trunks, disappearing into the mist. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Sam's fingers tightened on the wheel. "I don't like this." Neither did I. "We should have hit a road by now," I said quietly. Sam nodded, jaw tight. "Yeah, we should have." The rain picked up again, fat droplets splattering against the windshield. The wipers swiped back and forth, but visibility remained low. I checked the gas gauge, still over half a tank. But that didn't make me feel any better. Then I saw it, a break in the trees ahead. My breath caught as I leaned forward. There, look. Sam slowed the RV as we approached the clearing. Relief flooded through me as I saw the familiar gray of a paved road. We had found it, but as we rolled forward, something inside me screamed to stop. The road was wrong. The paint on the asphalt was faded, cracked. The surface looked worn, abandoned, as if it hadn't been driven on in years. And as I turned my head to look behind us, my stomach dropped. The road we had come from had vanished again. Just like before. Sam's hands trembled on the wheel. "I don't think we're supposed to be here." I swallowed hard, my pulse a frantic drum in my ears. The realization settled over me, cold and heavy. We weren't lost. We were trapped. The unexplainable intensifies, the road that fades. The reality of the disappearing road has begun to settle deep into my bones. What was once a casual, slightly eerie road trip has turned into something unnatural. I try to stay rational, telling myself that maybe we took a wrong turn and simply can't find our way back. But deep down, I know better. I pull out my phone, desperate to make sense of things. The GPS shows a single, unmarked road stretching forward, but nothing behind us. My heart hammers. I switch apps, refreshing the map. Same thing. The route we took just minutes ago no longer exists. "Try yours," I tell my wife, my voice uneven. She fumbles with her phone, hands shaking slightly. When she looks at the screen, her face drains of color. "It's blank," she whispers. "No service. No signal." A cold sweat breaks out along my back. I glance in the rearview mirror again, hoping against hope that the road will somehow reappear, that this is some weird trick of the mind. But there is nothing, just an expanse of untouched forest, dense and impenetrable, as though no road ever existed there at all. We drive on in silence for what feels like hours. The road ahead remains unchanged, an endless stretch of pavement cutting through towering trees. We pass no signs, no intersections, no other vehicles. I steal glances at my wife, whose grip on the dashboard has not loosened since we first noticed the road vanishing. I try to swallow the lump in my throat, forcing myself to stay calm. Then I notice something even worse. The trees alongside us aren't just trees anymore. They're off. At first, I can't pinpoint what's wrong, but as I keep driving, the realization settles in like a lead weight. They don't change. Every few minutes, I catch sight of the same twisted trunk, the same broken branch hanging at an unnatural angle, the same cluster of blackened leaves, unmoving despite the non-existent wind. We are trapped in a loop. Desperation sets in. I press the gas pedal harder, watching the speedometer climb. 60, 70, 80. The RV rumbles beneath us, the tires gripping pavement that should have led us somewhere, anywhere, by now. But the road does not change. The trees do not change. The loop tightens around us, an invisible snare. I slam on the brakes, panting. My wife lets out a sharp yelp as the RV lurches to a stop. I can't keep driving like this," I choke out. She nods, though her eyes are filled with terror. We sit in silence, waiting. For what? I don't know. Maybe for the road to reappear. Maybe for a sign. Maybe for something to break this godforsaken cycle. Then the headlights flicker. Once. Twice. Then they go out entirely. Darkness floods in like ink, thick and suffocating. The only light comes from the faint glow of the dashboard, casting eerie shadows over our frozen expressions. Then from somewhere outside the RV a sound. Not an animal. Not the wind. A footstep. Crunching on gravel. My breath catches. My wife grips my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Another footstep. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. Right outside the vehicle. I don't move. I barely breathe. My mind is screaming at me to start the engine, to get the hell out of here. But my body refuses to obey. The footsteps stop right beside my window. I don't dare look, but in the periphery of my vision, I see something. A shadow, not cast by our headlights, because they are off. Not cast by the moon, because there is none. A shape, human-like, but too tall. Too thin. It stands just outside, unmoving, watching. My wife lets out a whimper. Then, a knock. A slow, deliberate knock against the driver's side window. I squeeze my eyes shut. Maybe if I don't acknowledge it, it will go away. Maybe it's a hallucination. Maybe we've been driving too long, and our minds are playing tricks. But when I open my eyes again, I see it. A hand, pressed against the glass. It is pale, almost gray, with long fingers splayed unnaturally wide. No fingernails. No creases in the skin. And then, it moves. My instincts finally kick in. I turn the key, willing the engine to roar to life. It sputters. No. No, no, no. Not now. I turn the key again. Nothing. The hand slides down the window, leaving no smear, no print, no evidence that it was ever there. And then the RV's lights flicker back on. The road ahead is different. No more trees. No more pavement. Just an empty void. A whisper snakes through the air, curling into my ears, into my skull. A voice. Stay. I don't think. I don't hesitate. I slam my foot on the gas. The RV lurches forward into the unknown. The weight of dread hung over me like an invisible fog, thick and suffocating. The road behind us had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the void of an unknown force that defied logic. I stared into the abyss where pavement should have been, the trembling flashlight beam unable to penetrate the eerie emptiness. It was as if the road had never existed, as though we had stepped into a realm where rules did not apply. Brian clutched the map, his fingers white with tension. "This can't be real," he muttered, eyes darting from the GPS to the blank horizon stretching behind us. The screen still showed a winding road leading out, but there was nothing there, just an endless, shifting landscape that flickered unnaturally, like a glitch in reality itself. "We have to keep moving forward," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. Forward into what? The road ahead seemed solid, but could we trust it? Every instinct in my body screamed that we had already gone too far, but turning back was no longer an option. We climbed into the RV, the engine roaring to life like a mechanical beast. Brian gripped the wheel, his knuckles tight as he pressed on the gas. The RV lurched forward, but the moment we gained speed, the road behind us collapsed into the same formless void. The landscape seemed to shift in response to our movement, warping and twisting as if the world itself was being rewritten around us. The further we drove, the stranger it became. The trees lining the road no longer looked natural. Their gnarled trunks bent at impossible angles, their branches forming jagged patterns that reminded me of clawed hands reaching toward us. Shadows moved where they shouldn't have, stretching and bending, flickering in and out of existence like old film reels skipping frames. Brian swore under his breath. "This place is wrong." I didn't need to respond. The proof was all around us. The air felt heavier, thick like molasses, as if we were pushing against some unseen barrier. The headlights illuminated a road that shouldn't exist, winding further and further into nowhere. I reached for my phone again, but there was no signal, no time, no date. Just a blank screen reflecting my own wide-eyed fear back at me. Then, the radio crackled to life. A sharp burst of static erupted through the speakers, followed by something worse, a voice. Hollow, distant, distorted beyond recognition. "Keep driving." Brian and I exchanged a horrified look. The voice hadn't come from either of us, and it hadn't been a broadcast. It had been something else entirely, something watching us. "Who the hell was that?" Brian demanded, gripping the wheel so tight his hands shook. I fumbled with the radio, twisting the knob, but the static only deepened, warping into an agonized screech that sent a chill straight through my bones. Then just as suddenly, the voice returned, clearer this time. "Don't stop." I turned sharply, staring out the back window. My heart nearly stopped. The void was no longer empty. Figures stood in the darkness, half-formed silhouettes barely visible against the night. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel their presence, their eyeless faces locked onto us with unseen intensity. More of them flickered in and out, closer each time the headlights dimmed and flared back to life. Their forms twisted, elongated, shifting with an unnatural rhythm that defied all sense of reality. "Faster!" I screamed. Brian slammed on the gas, the RV roaring as it sped down the endless, ever-changing road. The figures remained still at first, but then, with an impossible fluidity, they moved. Not ran, not walked. They glided, jerking forward in unnatural bursts, flickering closer and closer as though existing in fractured time. The speedometer climbed, 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. The RV rattled as we tore through the unmarked road, but no matter how fast we went, the figures kept pace, their inhuman movements more erratic the further we drove. Then the road changed again. A fork appeared ahead where none had been before. One path continued forward, while the other veered sharply into the dense, unnatural woods. The GPS flickered between routes, unsure, stuttering between destinations that didn't make sense. "Which way?" Brian yelled. I didn't know. Neither road was safe. But something about the path through the woods felt even worse, as if it wasn't a road at all, but a trap. My instincts screamed at me to stay on the main road. "Go straight," I shouted. Brian obeyed, gripping the wheel as we barreled forward. The figures behind us grew more erratic, their forms warping like corrupted video files, distorting into grotesque shapes that barely resembled human forms. The closer they got, the colder the air became, frost creeping along the windows despite the summer heat. Then, without warning, the headlights cut out. The RV plunged into darkness. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the void. For several agonizing seconds, we were blind. I could hear Brian gasping, fumbling for the lights, the sound of static roaring louder and louder as the figures closed in. And then, just as suddenly, the lights returned. But we were no longer on the same road. The landscape had shifted entirely. The asphalt beneath us had become cracked and ancient, riddled with deep fissures as if it had been abandoned for centuries. The trees surrounding us were wrong, tall and skeletal, their bark peeling like rotting flesh. The sky was no longer dark but an unnatural shade of gray, as though the sun had died long ago. The figures were gone, but something told me they hadn't disappeared. They had just gotten closer. Brian gasped, his hands shaking as he looked at the road ahead. "What the hell just happened? Where are we?" I had no answer. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone again, hoping for some sign of normalcy. The screen flickered, no signal, no time, no date. Only one message appeared, a notification that shouldn't have been possible. No roads exist beyond this point. I dropped the phone as a slow realization settled in. We had gone too far, and now there was no way back. Darkness presses against the windshield as I drive, my knuckles white against the wheel. The headlights cast a feeble glow ahead, illuminating the endless road. My heart pounds, but I force myself to breathe slowly. I don't look back anymore. I can't, because there is no road behind me. The GPS has long since turned to static. My phone, drained of service and power, is now just a useless brick. I should have stopped when I had the chance. When I first noticed the road thinning behind me, its edges bleeding into nothingness like ink on wet paper. But my mind refused to accept it then, clinging to logic like a dying man grips a lifeline. Now there is no lifeline left. Only the road ahead, stretching into an abyss I can't escape. I try to focus on what's real, on the feeling of the wheel beneath my fingers, the hum of the tires against the pavement. But doubt claws at me. The RV feels different. The dashboard lights flicker, the air inside thick with an unspoken presence. The space behind me seems to shift when I'm not looking, as though something unseen moves within the shadows. I catch glimpses in the mirror, a shape just out of focus, a whisper of movement. But every time I turn, I find nothing but the empty interior. My grip tightens as my breath fogs against the cold glass. The highway remains unchanged, featureless and unending. No towns, no signs, no landmarks, just the same stretch of road, rolling endlessly into the void. I should be exhausted, but fear keeps me alert. It keeps me driving, because if I stop, I know the silence will swallow me whole. Then I hear it, a soft creak from behind. My body stiffens. The noise is faint, but unmistakable, the sound of shifting weight, of something moving. I swallow hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. I don't turn around. I don't dare. The radio crackles to life. My breath hitches as static fills the cabin, an eerie, fluctuating hum. And then, keep driving. A voice. Hollow. Distant. Not mine. My blood turns to ice. I slam my foot against the gas, the engine roaring in response. My pulse pounds as the RV surges forward. The road ahead remains featureless, stretching into nothingness. I don't care. I just need to get out. Away. From what? I don't know anymore. The rearview mirror flickers. For a fraction of a second, I see something. A face. Not mine. The air in my lungs vanishes. My stomach lurches as a wave of nausea grips me. I squeeze my eyes shut, my hands trembling on the wheel. When I force them open again, the mirror is empty. Just darkness. But I feel it. A presence. Behind me. Inside the RV. The road beneath me trembles, a subtle vibration I can feel in my bones. The sky outside is a void, no stars, no moon, just an ink-black nothingness pressing against the windows. My headlights barely cut through it, their glow swallowed by the abyss. And then, the road starts to fade. Not behind me this time, but ahead. I gasp as I watch it dissolve, the pavement vanishing in patches, crumbling into darkness. It's like reality itself is unraveling, the world disintegrating piece by piece. The RV lurches as the ground beneath it shifts, and I realize with horror that I have nowhere left to go. A whisper brushes my ear. Not through the radio. Not in my mind. Right beside me. You should have never stopped looking. I whip my head around, my breath strangled in my throat. A shape sits in the passenger seat. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the light. A person. Their face is wrong, blurred, shifting like static, features melting and reforming. Their eyes are hollow, endless pits that seem to stretch beyond the confines of reality. Their mouth doesn't move, but I hear their voice again, directly in my head. You were never driving, were you? The realization slams into me like a freight train. I can't remember where I started. I don't know how long I've been driving. I don't even know if I'm real anymore. I open my mouth to scream, but there's no sound. The road beneath me vanishes completely, and the RV plummets into the abyss. The world collapses around me, swallowed by the void. And then, silence. A gas station sits at the edge of a nameless highway, the neon open sign flickering in the dusty window. A man sits inside the convenience store, watching the empty road. He doesn't know why. He just feels compelled, like something is supposed to happen. The bell above the door jingles, but there's no one there. Just the faint scent of gasoline and the hum of the fridge in the corner. The man frowns, stepping outside. The wind howls through the empty parking lot. Then he sees it. An RV, parked at the pump. Engine off. No driver inside. And yet, The door is open, swinging slowly in the breeze. Inviting, waiting. The man hesitates, a chill crawling down his spine. Then, against every instinct screaming at him to run, he steps forward.